Hey everybody, how's it going? So we're going to do a nice little temp tower tutorial tonight. And it's a pretty simple process in Ideamaker on going through and establishing temperature changes in your slicing profile based on what layer you're printing at. So first and foremost, I mean, this is a pretty straightforward process, so we're just going to jump right into it. First thing you'll want to do is go over to like Thingiverse or some, one of those sites, wherever you're getting your models these days, and just download a temp tower. There's no less than probably 500,000 of them out there to choose from. I will link to the one that I have, that I use. I don't have preference. It was the first one I came across. But I did like it because it had some small features too, like these little small spikes and stuff like that. It does have some decent bridging and some small features and stuff that I like to test on, based on new filaments and things like that. But you can see it starts down here at like 220. Is the primary temperature you're starting at, and goes all the way down to like 175. Now I'm doing this for PLA. For sure, if you're doing this with PETG or ABS, find a temp tower that's suited for one of those profiles, because you're going to start at a much higher temperature and then come down. If you're doing PETG, you're starting at 220, and as soon as you get down to like 215 or 210, you're clogged. So don't use a PLA tower for PETG or ABS or one of those other high temp filaments, okay? But I'm never gonna, I personal preference, I never print down this low even with PLA. I'm sure there's some out there that do, like some low melting point PLA stuff, but I don't buy them, I don't use them, and I think it's a waste of time, because eventually, like at about 185, everything starts under extruding and gets really stringy, or really spongy from a print perspective, and then ultimately the thing starts clogging. So I'm not going to print that low. So I'm going to cut this model down to save a little bit of time. So I'm going to first select it. I'm going to hit free cut. I'm going to go ahead and drag this plane right above the 190 and hit start cut. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete this top portion. So there we go. And it should have already fixed it. So we have the nice green checkbox. So the model is nice and watertight. So I'm going to go from 220 down to 190, and that's about the lowest I'm going to go. So I'm going to go to start slicing, and the first thing I'm going to do, and I've already made a test one down here, but it's probably best to make a duplicate of one of your existing profiles and then make a temp tower test. Oh my god, so many T's, profile that you could just play with and reuse all over the place. And I do this because once you start changing all those temperatures, if you're using your standard profile, you'll forget. I promise, one time you'll forget, and the next time you run it on the cool thing that you just figured out, you'll forget that it's there. So I take my generic PLA one, and I hit make duplicate, and then I say temp tower test. Make sure it's based on my generic PLA template, because that's what I'm using in this case, and hit OK. So that's what I've come across with here. So first thing we're going to do, though, before we really jump into anything, is write down some things, some layers. So let's go ahead and slice, just so we can get to a preview. That's the only point of doing this initially, is just to get to a preview. So first thing, I keep saying first thing. Next thing, so starting at layer 0, right? Let's just move up and see where our temperatures, which layers our temperatures change at. So if we move up the scale here, so there's 220, and I'm going to say so layer 45, 46, I'm going to drop it 5 degrees down to 215. When I get up here to about layer 80, 81, I'm going to drop it another 5 degrees to 210. 116-ish, I'm going to drop it again by 5 degrees. So you get the idea. You just need to make sure, and I would get a pen and paper and write these down, right? Because once you go back into your slicing template, it's not easy to sort of pop back and forth, and you're just going to get frustrated. So write them down just as you're going through it here. I'm only going to do like the first 3, because after that it's pretty simple. So we go. I've got those. I've got them all written down. I've got my first 3 written down. I know exactly what I'm going to do. I'm going to go ahead and hit start slicing here. Make sure my temp tower test is selected. Edit. And I'm just going to roll through and just make sure, so your layer counts obviously are based on your layer heights. So if you decide, no, I'm going to do this at 0.1, well then go back to your preview and redo your layer heights. Okay? So I print just about everything at 0.2 with some minor exceptions, but for this test, I'm going to always do a 0.2. So that's important. That's what your layer counts are based on. let's see, I'm going to make sure that I'm doing a start position for my seams. So my start points, I'm putting right that corner. That's pretty much where I try to always put some stuff. I'm trying to make it consistent. And I'm using a 0.6 nozzle. I'm leaving on my retraction and speeds and stuff as I would typically run it, just because I want to see how this thing runs under my normal settings, right? And all I'm doing really is changing temperatures. And I'm doing a standard like 5-6% infill, nothing crazy there. For my bottom layers, I'm doing 4 bottom layers. I'm doing 2 top layers on this one because it really doesn't matter. Normally I do probably 5 or 6. Nothing else in here really matters, I don't think. Nope, nothing else matters there. I'm doing no support, right? No support on this one. Platform, I'm only doing skirt. For cooling, I'm just making sure that my fan's on because I would normally have my fan on starting at layer 2 for PLA. And now here's where we get into the temperature stuff. Before we do temperature, let's just roll through the other tabs real fast. So my default printing speeds, I'm using that 60, 50 for inner, 60 default, 50 and 50 for outer and inner shell. A 31st layer speed, my infill is 40. My bridging speed is 30 millimeters a second. And that's important because we have bridges on this, right? There's bridges and small features, those little spikes on the side. So I wanted to handle those as I normally would. So basically saying is when you detect a bridge, slow everything down to 30 millimeters a second. What else? That's, we're good there. Nothing here in the advanced. I would say, in my case, I'm going to make sure I don't override my filament setting flow rate. I'm going to go ahead and leave it at 100% because that's what the default setting is for this filament profile. Nothing really in ooze. And the only really, I think, important thing here on the other tab is to make sure that this enable bridge detection is turned on. So since we have gaps in between, right, it's testing the bridging and how much sag we're getting in that filament at various temperatures. I would say make sure enable bridge detection is turned on. And small features. So since we have those little tiny spikes on the side, those were considered small features for this profile. So anything that's 6 millimeters or less, I say it's a small feature. And you should slow the speed multiplier. So your speed multiplier is 20% of your default. So so it'll slow this down to probably 5 or 6 millimeters a second when it gets to those really small spikes. And small feature infill density, I've got it 100%. So instead of trying to do, you know, essentially when it gets down to the small ones, it's going to print it. It would normally print it hollow. In this case, with that turned on, it's going to print those little small features as solid as it can, given the diameter of the nozzle. So now that we know all that stuff, let's pop back over to the temperature tab. And we're going to be playing in this primary extruder tab here, right? You've got a heat bed one and you've got a primary extruder. Let's delete these real fast. And so since we know our initial run is at 220, right? That's the very bottom stuff. And then the temperature decreases as you go up. We're going to just go ahead and start at 220. And then I'm going to say when we get to, what did I write down? Layer 46, we're going to drop it down to 215. Add temp. When we get to layer 81, we drop it down to 210. Add temp. And when we get down to 116, we're going to drop down to 205. Add temp. And you can keep going. All right, obviously there's this one, that temp tower goes all the way down to 190. So you would just keep building those profiles and those that control list down as far as you want to go. And then basically when it gets down, it's just going to stop printing. So from there, you just hit OK. You hit slice. I still like to look at the preview. You know, there is no temperature view, but what I like to do is look at the speed view. So you can see down here at the bottom, it's running around at my defaults, right, in the 40s, 50s, and 60s. That's what these bright orange and yellow colors are. And then we're getting into the blue, so these are probably around 10-ish. And then these greens right in the 30s. And then you see these little small features here, right, the little spikes, where it's going to print in like probably 5 millimeters a second. And because I'm running a 0.6 nozzle, it's not going to fully form those tips, right? You're always going to get a little bit of a flat top. If you're running a smaller nozzle, 0.4, you're going to see more of a spike. If you're running a 0.3 or 0.2, you're going to see even more. It is what it is. And then here's the bridges, you know, obviously, right? So we don't have No supports ever turned on. We have bridge detection turned on. So when it identifies this gap, it's going to identify that gap as a bridge. Turn on bridge settings, which is why this is in green, which is down on this 30 millimeters a second. And there you go. Export. Load your filament, run it on the printer, and that's all there is to it. So don't forget to like and subscribe. We'll do a lot more of these in the future. Thanks a lot. Have a good one.